May 22, 2026. That date is circled on a whiteboard somewhere deep inside Disney headquarters, and there are a lot of very nervous people staring at it. Because on that day, Star Wars returns to movie theaters for the first time in 7 years. And the film that gets to carry that weight is not a Skywalker story. It is not a Jedi prophecy. It is not the return of a legacy character that audiences have been waiting decades to see again. It is a short green creature and a guy in a helmet. The Mandalorian and Grogu is the most important Star Wars film since The Force Awakens. Not because of what is in it, but because of what is riding on it. If this film works, Star Wars goes back to the big screen in a major way. If it does not work, the franchise retreats to streaming and probably stays there for a very long time. This is not hype, this is not clickbait. This is the actual situation. And today we are going to break down exactly how Star Wars got here, what the numbers are telling us right now, and what happens next, because the answer to that last question involves Ryan Gosling and a director who just wrapped filming on a desert planet somewhere in the Mediterranean Sea. Welcome back. This channel is where we take the franchise stories that matter and actually dig into them. Not just the trailers and the hype, but the business decisions, the creative gambles, and the history behind them. Star Wars has one of the most complicated recent histories of any franchise in Hollywood, and what is happening right now is genuinely fascinating. Let us get into it. To understand why May 22nd matters so much, you have to understand what Star Wars used to be. There was a time when a new Star Wars film was a cultural event on the scale of nothing else. People camped outside theaters. Critics argued for years about whether this scene or that line was good or bad. The films were unavoidable. You did not opt into Star Wars found you. Even the prequels, which got absolutely hammered by critics and a vocal portion of the fanbase, were enormous events. Revenge of the Sith in 2005 opened to over $100 million domestically, and everyone saw it because everyone needed to see how Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader. Even a bad Star Wars film was a big deal. Then Disney bought Lucasfilm in 2012 and everything changed, but not all at once. The Force Awakens in 2015 was massive, over $2 billion worldwide. Then Rogue One in 2016 opened to $155 million. Things still felt good. Then The Last Jedi arrived in 2017 and split the fanbase into two hostile camps that have barely agreed on anything since. Then Solo happened in 2018. Solo, a Star Wars story, opened to about $84 million over a 4-day Memorial Day weekend and was considered a disaster for a franchise of this scale. And the cause of that disaster was not just the film itself. It was the audience fatigue that had been building. Too many films too quickly. A fanbase that no longer trusted the direction of the franchise. A general audience that had started to disengage. Lucasfilm's response to Solo was to go in the completely opposite direction. Instead of more films, they pivoted to Disney+. And out of that pivot came The Mandalorian in 2019, which was genuinely great, followed by The Book of Boba Fett, which was not, Obi-Wan Kenobi, which was middling, Andor, which was excellent but nobody watched it in real time, Ahsoka, which divided fans, and The Acolyte, which was the lowest rated debut for any Star Wars property and got cancelled after 1 season. That is the track record. Some wins, a lot of stumbles, and a franchise that has never quite figured out what it wants to be in the Disney era. And now we are here. The TV experiment is winding down and Star Wars is heading back to theaters. Here's something the creators did not necessarily want to advertise loudly, but Jon Favreau confirmed it anyway. The Mandalorian and Grogu was originally going to be the 4th season of the show. Then the 2023 writers' strike happened, halted development, and during that pause Disney made the call to convert it into a theatrical film instead. So the question that every fan has quietly been asking is legitimate. Is this actually a movie, or is it a very expensive TV season that got put in a nicer box? Favreau has insisted that starting from scratch for the theatrical format forced genuinely different thinking. The film is described as a standalone adventure that works for audiences who have never watched a single episode of the show. That is a smart strategy, because for every dedicated Mandalorian fan, there are probably 5 people who watched the first season and drifted off somewhere around season 3. Which had an audience score on Rotten Tomatoes of just 51% despite critics liking it. The plot involves Din Djarin, Pedro Pascal under the helmet, and Grogu, now working for the New Republic and assigned to rescue Jabba the Hutt's son Rada in exchange for critical intelligence. The cast includes Pedro Pascal, Sigourney Weaver, Jeremy Allen White as the voice of Rada the Hutt, and Martin Scorsese in what has to be the most unexpected Star Wars casting in history. It opens May 22nd on 4,000+ screens with a major IMAX presence. The marketing push hit full force on May the 4th, when Lucasfilm showed 25 minutes of footage in IMAX theaters globally. Jon Favreau himself is directing, which is a big deal given that the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian are widely considered the best thing Disney-era Star Wars has produced. The bones of this project are solid. The question is whether the audience shows up. Let us talk about the tracking numbers because they are interesting, and the way different outlets are spinning them tells you a lot about how nervous people are. Early tracking had this film at around $71 to $80 million domestically over a 4-day Memorial Day opening weekend. Then the marketing campaign started ramping up and the projections moved to somewhere between $90 and $100 million. On one hand, $90 to $100 million is a number that most studio films would celebrate. On the other hand, this is Star Wars. The lowest opening for a Star Wars live-action film in the Disney era is still Solo at $84 million over that same 4-day Memorial Day frame, and that film was considered a box office disaster severe enough to cancel an entire planned era of Star Wars spin-off films. So what are we looking at here? If the film opens around 90 million, it technically clears Solo. Disney will present that as a win. Some will call it a disappointment for the brand. The truth, as always, is somewhere in the middle. Here's the more relevant comparison that one outlet made and I think is genuinely useful. The Simpsons movie opened to $74 million in its first 3 days in 2007. The X-Files movie opened to $30 million. Sex and the City opened to $57 million. If you frame Mandalorian and Grogu not as a Star Wars film but as a television-to-film transition, which is what it actually is, the numbers start to look a lot more reasonable. The film was also reportedly made for about $166 million, which is cheap by Star Wars standards. Solo ballooned to over $300 million because of reshoots and the director replacement mid-production. A $90 million opening on a $166 million budget is a fundamentally different situation than a $104 million opening on a $300 million budget. Solo still bombed. Mandalorian and Grogu at similar numbers might actually turn a profit. But box office math is not the only thing being measured here. Disney is also measuring whether audiences will pay to see characters they met on a streaming service on a big screen. That is a question that nobody has answered yet for a Disney Plus property. The Marvels, which featured characters from streaming shows, opened to just $46 million and was widely considered a failure. Thunderbolts, same situation, opened to $74 million. Neither of those results encouraged Disney about the streaming to theatrical pipeline. While all of this is happening at the box office level, there has been a massive shift at the top of Lucasfilm that most casual fans may have missed. Kathleen Kennedy, who has run Lucasfilm since Disney acquired it in 2012, has stepped down. She oversaw everything, the sequel trilogy, the spin-offs, the streaming era, all of it. Her tenure is one of those situations where the wins get credited to other people and the losses land on her, which is not entirely fair, but that is how franchise leadership gets evaluated. The person replacing her on the creative side is Dave Filoni, with Lin-Wen Brennan handling the business side as co-president. For those who are not deep in Star Wars lore, Filoni is the person who ran Star Wars, the Clone Wars animated series, which effectively rehabilitated the prequel trilogy for an entire generation of fans. He was George Lucas's hand-picked apprentice for animation and has been the backbone of the streaming-era Star Wars creative vision, developing the Mandoverse alongside Jon Favreau. This matters for our conversation today, because the Mandalorian and Grogu movie is essentially Filoni's thesis film. The interconnected streaming universe he has been building, Mandalorian, Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka, Skeleton Crew, was all supposed to build to an Avengers-style team-up film. That big crossover event movie has reportedly been put on the back burner. The pivot to making this one standalone film work in theaters appears to be the new priority. Filoni has real strengths. He understands Star Wars mythology at a deep level. He knows how to build characters and reward long-term fans. His weaknesses are the flip side of that. He sometimes prioritizes lore over accessibility, which is not great when your goal is to get casual audiences back into seats. The good news is that this film is Favreau's baby, not Filoni's. Favreau directed it. And Favreau has proven twice already with the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian that he knows how to make Star Wars that works for everyone. Here is where we get analytical, because the outcome of this film has genuine downstream consequences. Scenario 1, the film works. Let us say it opens around $100 million, gets strong word of mouth, and legs its way to $350 to $400 million worldwide. That would be a clear statement that audiences will follow Star Wars characters from streaming to theaters. In that case, Disney will almost certainly expand their theatrical ambitions. More films, bigger productions, less reliance on Disney Plus as the primary storytelling venue. Scenario 2, the film underperforms. Opens at $70 million, drops hard the second weekend because it did not bring in the family audience, and tops out domestically around $200 million. In that scenario, the lesson Disney draws is that only mainline Skywalker saga films can open big. Side characters belong on streaming. And that conclusion carries a really grim implication. It means that all the time and money spent building the streaming era of Star Wars may have permanently shrunk the appetite for this franchise at the theatrical level. The stakes are real and they are high. This is not a standard release. This is a test. There's a third scenario worth mentioning, which is that the film is critically terrible and word of mouth destroys it. A predicted Rotten Tomatoes score of around 73% based on current Kalshi market predictions is decent but not spectacular. For context, Rogue One sits at 84, Solo at 69, Rise of Skywalker at 51. A 73% score with strong audience reactions would be fine. A 73% score with audiences leaving the theater feeling like they watched an extended Disney Plus episode might produce reviews on social media that do real damage to the second weekend numbers. Jon Favreau knows all of this. He helped create this character and this world. The pressure on him is significant, but this is also not his first rodeo with high-stakes franchise filmmaking. This is the guy who directed Iron Man, the film that launched the MCU. He knows what he is doing. Regardless of how The Mandalorian and Grogu performs, something is already happening that tells you Disney has not lost faith in Star Wars on the big screen. Star Wars Starfighter. May 28, 2027, directed by Shawn Levy, starring Ryan Gosling. And that sentence alone is worth a full video, which I will probably make closer to the release date. Here is what we know. The film is set approximately 5 years after the Rise of Skywalker. It is a completely standalone story with all new characters. Gosling plays a new character. The script is by Jonathan Tropper, who also wrote The Adam Project for Levy. The cast includes Mia Goth as the antagonist, Matt Smith, Amy Adams, Aaron Pierre, and a 14-year-old first-time actor named Flynn Gray, who is described by producers as genuinely exceptional. Levy wrapped filming in late 2025 and described walking onto the set as surreal. Gosling, speaking at Star Wars Celebration in Tokyo, said the script is, and I am paraphrasing here because his exact quote is worth reading yourself, one of the best he has read, filled with heart and adventure and original characters. The fact that Star Wars, Starfighter exists and is already in post-production tells us that Disney made the decision to invest in theatrical Star Wars before they knew how Mandalorian and Grogu would do. That is either confidence or sunk cost, depending on how cynical you are. I lean toward confidence because the Levy and Gosling combination is not the kind of deal you make if you're hedging. Those are A-list names attached to a prestige production. That is Disney saying that Star Wars on the big screen is a priority they are willing to bet real money on. But Starfighter is a safer bet in some ways than Mandalorian and Grogu. It is new characters, fresh start, no streaming baggage. If audiences are skeptical about paying to see a TV show character on a big screen, a completely original Star Wars story starring Ryan Gosling sidesteps that problem entirely. Here's where I land on all of this. Star Wars is at a genuinely interesting crossroads, not a desperate one, not a franchise in freefall, but a complicated one where the decisions made over the next 12 months will determine what this universe looks like for the rest of this decade. The Mandalorian and Grogu has every reason to be a solid movie. Jon Favreau behind the camera, Pedro Pascal in front of it. A shorter budget that reduces the pressure to hit impossible numbers. A Memorial Day window with no serious competition. And a character in Grogu who has been a genuine pop culture phenomenon since 2019. The question is not really whether the film is good. The question is whether the experiment of bringing a streaming-born story to theaters is one that audiences will participate in. And that question has not been answered yet for any Disney Plus property. May 22nd is the answer. If you are a Star Wars fan and you are watching this, I would genuinely love to know where you stand. Are you excited for this film? Are you skeptical? Are you going opening weekend or waiting for the reviews? Drop it in the comments. And if you want to go deeper on the Star Wars lore side of any of this, the Mandovis, the Ahsoka threads, the Thrawn situation, let me know and I will build that video out next. Hit subscribe if you want to stay in the loop on this one. May 22nd is coming fast and this conversation is just getting started.